Today in How About Story, I'm going to talk about 5 character introductions that tell you everything you need to know about the character the moment they're introduced. All 5 of these examples are from film. I do want to focus on writing, but the reason why I'm choosing 5 examples from film is that I want you to have the image in your head immediately, and most of these are films that many of my listeners are likely to have seen. I'm also choosing 5 examples that would be very easy to transition into prose, as opposed to introductions that incorporate a specific facial look or something like that that conveys who this character is, or something very visual that you need to see in order to understand who this character is. And keep in mind, this is not a definitive list. This is strictly 5 character introductions that I think are good examples. I tried to pick a variety of examples. I try not to pick things that have the same reason they're great. Another thing is I also avoided a couple of obvious choices, mainly because I just think that makes for a boring list. 2 examples that I avoided, which I had on the list and I took off strictly because they're the first thing that popped in my head, were Jack Sparrow in the first Pirates of the Caribbean. His introduction is one of the best ever put to screen. And the Joker, Heath Ledger's Joker, in The Dark Knight. Both of these are examples that, to me, they're like the epitome of a great character introduction. But again, they're just choices that I think are cliche. I think they're too obvious. So with that said, here's my list of 5 character introductions that tell you everything you need to know about the character the moment they're introduced. Number 5, Sully, Monsters Incorporated. Now I know, I'm an animator and I'm picking an animation for my first slot. It's the only animation that made the list though, and it is one of my favorite animated movies, and the reason that I love this introduction so much is the contrast. At first, we're told, before we meet Sully, we're told about him by Waternoose, who runs Monsters Incorporated. And he tells us that Sully is tough, tenacious, intimidating. We need scarers like James P. Sullivan. And we transition to Sully, who is asleep in bed, snoring, and then his buddy blows a horn in his face and he wakes up, and then it jumps straight into his workout montage. What I love about this introduction is that contrast of hearing what a hard worker he is, hearing how scary and intimidating and tough he is, from somebody who we have already come to respect, somebody who the moment that character was introduced, he was intimidating, and he tells us, now the person who's really intimidating, that is Sully, he is impressive, and then we see him and he's asleep in bed. I think that this sort of contrast is really fun for a character, to start out telling us something about the character before we meet them, and then go to meet the character and see that they're deeper than that. They're also, kind of the opposite of that at the same time. I think that a great character introduction can demonstrate that the character is deeper than, a surface level cliche hero. Number 4, Lindsay, The Abyss. I love the movie The Abyss. When I was coming up with this list, that was the first thing that popped in my head was I had to pick something from The Abyss, and there are a lot of great characters in that film, but none have as great of a character introduction as Lindsay. Lindsay is one of my favorite characters, and the reason is that she has a great character arc. She starts out as literally being called the Queen Bitch of the Universe, and as the story progresses, we get to see that she's very deep and she's got a lot to her. But what's interesting is that her character introduction tells us everything we need to know about her because it tells us in 4 ways. And within those 4 ways, we get some of the idiosyncrasies of the deepness of her character and how far this is going to go and kind of where she's going to head in the story. The first way we're introduced to her is actually Chris Elliott's character in, I think this is possibly only the extended edition, but he sees her getting out of a helicopter and he says, "Oh no, look who's with him, Queen Bitch of the Universe." So the first thing we know is that she is not liked. She's somebody who people are intimidated by and talk bad about behind her back. So that's the first thing we get to know about her. The second way that we get to know about Lindsay is through kind of the symbolism of a conversation that's happening between Bud and another character over the radio. Bud is underwater in a sort of submersible station, and McBride, this other character, is topside in a ship, so they're talking kind of over video chat. And McBride tells Bud, well, it's official, sports fans. They're calling it Hurricane Frederick, and it's going to be making our lives real interesting in a few hours. And then Bud responds with, Fred, huh? I don't know. Hurricanes should be named after women. And immediately after he says this, a door bursts open and Lindsay comes sweeping into the room with the hurricane following behind her. So that's the second way we get to know her, is the symbolism of there's a hurricane. Bud had just said hurricanes should be named for women, and she comes crashing in carrying the hurricane with her. So here comes this woman that's just going to be a powerhouse. The third way that we get to know her is through the conversation that she and Bud have immediately after this, where she just takes immediate control of the conversation, and she's kind of bullying Bud around. And she's really upset because she had built this submersible station that Bud is now letting the government take control of. So she's kind of insulting him, and she ends the conversation by saying, Virgil, you wiener. It's just this really impactful conversation where you get to see her attitude and her ability to take charge of a conversation and just to be, again, this powerhouse. But I mentioned that there was a fourth way, and then I mentioned that you kind of get to see the idiosyncrasies of her character. And the fourth way is through Bud's interpretation of their conversation. He does end the conversation by saying, God, I hate that bitch. But before that, when he's just talking to her, you can tell that he genuinely loves her. And despite her abusing him and being so mean and vicious and aggressive, you can tell that there must be more to her because of the way that Bud sees her. And it's not a sexual thing. It's not a she's beautiful and so he's, putting up with her mistreatment or whatever. You can tell that there is a deeper story between them and that he loves her truly. And that makes you want to know more about her and more about their relationship. And of course, it gets into that throughout the film. So that's the other way that this is a great introduction for a character, is you get to see the kind of the ugly side of this character's personality, but then you also see through somebody else's perspective that there's more to this character and that this character is worth knowing. Number 3. Percy, The Green Mile. The Green Mile is another one of my favorite movies. It's also one of my favorite books. It's a fantastic story, and one of the characters that I love in it is, I'll do another episode sometime about characters that you love to hate versus characters that you hate to hate. I think of, for example, Umbridge is a character that I hate to hate. I hate that character. I don't think she's fun to read about. I think she's just obnoxious, and her meanness is not appealing. Whereas Percy from The Green Mile is one of the most entertainingly wicked characters I've ever read or seen on screen. He's such a fun, obnoxious, horrible character. But the way that he's introduced tells you everything you need to know about him. What you need to know about him is that he's a little shrew, a little weasel that you are just going to hate. The moment he arrives, I think you hear him before you see him, because in the story of The Green Mile, he is leading John Coffey, who is a man who's been sentenced to death, and is arriving on the Green Mile, which is death row, to await his own execution. And I mean, of course, there's the I don't want to spoil the story. If you've never read it or seen it, then definitely do so. But you come to get to know this character of John Coffey, and when you reflect back on Percy's treatment of him, it really becomes more like, I really don't like Percy. But the thing that's great about Percy's introduction is, unlike what I mentioned about Lindsay's character, where she's introduced in such a dramatic, there's like 4 layers to it, with Percy, it's literally just as he's leading John Coffey onto the mile, he keeps repeating, dead man walking, we got a dead man walking here, dead man walking. And he repeats it so much that it's really annoying. But it's also like, what an a-hole. Why is he doing this? He's being such a bully. And he's also, they kind of use a shorthand with this character of making him the short character with the short character complex, where he's got this big attitude, but he's much smaller than everybody around him. And of course, compared to John Coffey, who's like 8 feet tall, he is just this tiny little man, and he's just bullying this giant tower of muscle and pushing him, along the mile. But it's just that simple, dead man walking, we got a dead man walking here, introduction of this character that just tells you immediately you are going to dislike this character. And this is confirmed when Tom Hanks's character, who is, of course, who you're seeing this story through his perspective, he tells Percy to shut up, and then pretty much right after this, he kicks Percy off the mile. So it gives you the confirmation of what you've already learned for yourself, that you're not supposed to like this character. Number 2, Nicholas Angel, Hot Fuzz. Now, what I love about this introduction is the other ones I mentioned, the subtleties of Lindsay's, the character that you know you're going to hate just by this one line that he keeps repeating of Percy, and the contrast of Sully in Monsters Incorporated. What I love about Nicholas Angel's introduction in Hot Fuzz is it's entirely exposition. You'd have to, whether it's writing a script or writing a novel, you'd have to have a very specific character or a very specific writing approach to make this sort of introduction work. But as I said, Nicholas Angel's introduction is just entirely exposition. It starts out with him speaking about himself, saying, Police Constable Nicholas Angel, born unschooled in London, graduated from Canterbury University in 1993 with a double UFEO2 RST in politics and sociology. Attended police training college, displaying an impressive aptitude in both field training and theoretical studies. It goes on for a while. I won't read the entire thing. But it just basically, it shows you a montage of things that this police officer has done, including getting stabbed in the hand by Peter Jackson dressed as Santa Claus, which is pretty fun. But it just tells you everything you need to know about the character right away. And because he's the one delivering the lines, you understand how seriously he takes his job. He is all about his job, 100%. And then, of course, you get to know the character over time, and his sort of arc in the story is that he takes his job so seriously that he doesn't know how to unwind. And that, of course, plays into the story itself, where he sort of gets gaslit into believing that he takes his job too seriously and that he's seeing terrible things where there aren't any. And of course, that's the arc of the story. Again, if you've never seen it, see it. It's incredible. But again, what I love about this introduction is it's just him telling you who he is right up front through exposition. So once you get into the rest of the movie, you already know exactly who this character is. It's a phenomenal introduction. Number 1. This is my top pick for a character introduction. And again, this is not a definitive list by any means. I'm sure that after I finish this video, I'm going to think of something else I like more. But this is of all the things that I thought about, of all the movies I reflected on, this was my number 1 pick. Dr. Alan Grant, Jurassic Park. And everybody knows this introduction, of course. This on my list is probably the movie that the most people have seen. Dr. Grant is somebody who doesn't like kids, who doesn't like technology, who wants things to kind of stay the way that they are. And much like Lindsay from The Abyss, we're told who Alan Grant is before we meet him. That's the first layer of his introduction. We're told by somebody else that he is, basically what we're told is that he's the best in the business of paleontology. It's deeper than that, obviously, but what we're told is that he's the best and that somebody wants him, but you'll never get him out of Montana because he's like me, he's a digger. So that's what we hear about him. We hear that he's the best. Cut immediately to somebody calling for him and him standing up into screen and saying, I hate computers. So the very first thing we hear from him is that he is a bit outdated. He does not like current technology. He wants to kind of live as things are and not move forward into the future. Immediately following this, kind of showing, first of all, how much he knows about dinosaurs, his own theories, which at the time were controversial theories about dinosaur evolution. So we learn that he's somebody who thinks outside the box and is willing to put his own reputation on the line. He even gets laughed at by people for his thoughts, which turn out to be right, of course. But then we meet this kid who, of course says, oh, if it turned into a bird, that doesn't sound so scary. It's like a 6-foot turkey. And so then Alan immediately transitions to terrifying this kid by suggesting that what a raptor would do to him if it was to meet him would be to go after his groin with a claw. So we immediately go, okay, so this guy, he doesn't like technology, he's the best in the business, and he really doesn't like kids. These three things are all going to be very important to the story as it plays out. But none of them seem particularly important. They just seem like things that we're getting to know about this character as a person. And that's what I love about it, and that's what I think makes for the best character introductions. When you're telling people things they absolutely need to know for the story, but you're not force-feeding them to them in such a way that it seems obvious that this is where the story is headed. And that's why Dr. Alan Grant from Jurassic Park makes my number one of character introductions that tell you everything you need to know about the character the moment they're introduced. I hope you've enjoyed this list. If you have a favorite character introduction of your own, I would love to hear about it. Please leave a comment down below. And also let me know what sorts of things you'd like to hear from this podcast. Do you enjoy top 5 lists, or do you like to go over specific tips for writing, kind of like I've done in the past? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.